In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build average true range scans inside of ThinkorSwim. We'll do this by building two different ATR scans. The first one is very easy, very straightforward. We're going to be scanning for stocks that have a high ATR value. The way we're going to define this high ATR is by using the moving average. We're using the basic average function, the mean average, and we're going to be looking at a 50-bar mean average, what that ATR value is, and compare that to the current bar's ATR value to see where is our current ATR greater than the average ATR. So that's the first scan, and it should give you a nice introduction of how to reference the ATR value in ThinkorSwim. After this, we'll move on to scan number 2, which I think is the more useful scan. In scan number 2, we're going to be building a scan which allows you to find stocks that are compressing near the 50-period simple moving average. This is the screenshot of Micron Technologies on the daily time frame chart. And on my chart, I also have some moving averages. The cyan one is the 8 EMA, the magenta is the 21, the gold is the 34 EMA, those are the 3 EMAs, the dashed line is the 50 SMA, and the white dashed is the 200 SMA right down here. Now we can see price is essentially compressing right near this 50 SMA value, and the moving averages so far have decent structure. What I mean by decent structure is we don't have stacked moving averages, but the 8 EMA is greater than the 34 EMA. That's going to be one condition we search for. And the 34 EMA is greater than the 50 SMA, and that's still allowing us to have this slightly upward sloping movement. So if we take all of the observations from this particular pattern in Micron, we have essentially the following requirements. The first is the previous 10 bars must be in a tight range. And the tight range definition is where the ATR is going to help us really accelerate that entire process with one simple line. After that, we're going to have another condition which says price should be within X percentage of the 50 SMA. I've used 5 here as an example. And finally, we'll have in a few basic moving average conditions. The 8 EMA should be greater than the 34 EMA, and the 34 EMA should be greater than the 50 SMA. After building this scan, you should have a really good understanding of how to work with the ATR. In the first scan, you learned how to use it directly. In the second scan, you learned how the ATR is one piece of a larger puzzle in which you combined other indicators to build a much more robust scan. All right, with that, let's start with building scan number 1 and jumping straight into ThinkorSwim. Now inside of ThinkorSwim, I'm going to start with adding in 2 basic liquidity filters first. The first will be a stock filter. I'll say basic minimum stock price must be $10. The second, let's use volume. Average volume must be greater than 1 million shares. Let's actually change this from 1 million to 2 million just to make sure we don't hit the execution timeout error. Now let's add in one more study filter. And this time we can add this filter as a custom filter and take our ThinkScript editor here and delete all of the code that we have inside. Now inside of our panel here, we can start by adding in the ATR value by simply saying def ATR is equal to ATR and referencing the study. Now there's 2 different ways that you can reference the ATR in ThinkorSwim. This is, I think, the faster, the shortcut approach. And in this approach, if you wanted to modify the 2 parameters, the length and the type of moving average, you could do so by simply, let's say you wanted, instead of the default length of 14, let's say you wanted 20. You could simply type in 20, and now you would be using 20 as your new length. Let's say instead of just the length, you wanted to modify the length and the average type. Well, you would add in a comma, and here you could add in the average type of, say, exponential, average type.exponential, and instead of the default of Wilder's, you're now using the 20-period exponential moving average. Now, I don't really mind using the default here, so I simply just type in ATR, and this is a lot faster than even needing to modify anything there. Now let's say instead of this, you wanted to use the slightly more thorough approach. Come inside of charts here, come inside of ATR, pull up the code, and you would simply copy paste these first 3 lines right here, come back inside of our scan tab, and the scan that we were working on, we can paste in those 3 lines right there, and I'll comment out that 1 line we just created. And that's another way that you can reference the ATR, by taking the built-in study and using the plot value there. Instead of needing to bring in these 3 lines of code, you can simply reference that with this simple one-liner. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. Now let's remove this, go back to the one-liner here, and let's change this ATR to a def variable. Now we can create a new one called average ATR. And here we can simply say average of the ATR value. And we said we wanted a 50-day average, so we can use 50 as our length here. And for our plot condition, we can say plot signal is equal to ATR. So current bar's ATR is greater than the average ATR. And that's the 50 bar average. And since we're on the daily filter here, the daily time frame, this is looking at 50 past days. Click OK. And let's run the scan to see from our giant list of 6,123 stocks how many we're left with. All right, so just a handful, 246. NVIDIA here at the very top. Let's see what happens if we come into a chart of NVIDIA. And we can see that the ATR value is in fact greater than the average. This bottom study is simply that same scanner code. I just plotted both lines here instead so we could actually see it to compare what the studies and the scans are showing us. So back to our scan, NVIDIA passes the list. Let's use Ford as another example. If we come into Ford, we can see that with our current bar, the ATR is now greater than the average. It's meeting our scan criteria and thus coming up on our scan. So this is scan number 1. Now let's move on to scan number 2, which I think is a slightly more useful scan. In scan number 2, we have these following requirements, which we are going to translate into ThinkorSwim code. We come inside here. Let's come inside of our ThinkorSwim code here. I'm going to remove the average since we don't need that anymore. And let's start by first creating that compressed 10 bar range value. So we'll say compressed range. And the way we're going to do this is by comparing the highest high and the lowest low for the past 10 bars. And we'll compare that to the ATR variable. And we might need to add in a multiplier here to make sure that we actually find some stocks. So let's start by building that out. We'll say def highest high. And here we can say highest high over the past 10 bars is what this variable is going to be equal to. Similarly, we'll have a lowest low, and this will be equal to lowest, and this takes in the first 2 parameters. The first parameter is what is the variable that you'd like to find the lowest of. In this case, we're looking for the lowest low, and same thing, the past 10 bars. Now we'll use this as our range, so I'll say range is equal to the highest high minus the lowest low, and that's simply going to give us whatever that is as an actual range, which we can compare to our ATR variable. So we'll say range ATR check, and here we can check, or actually you can say range compression, and we'll check if our range is less than or equal to our ATR variable, so our average true range, times, let's say, a multiplier of 2. Now let's see what happens to this giant list of stocks when we simply add in range compression as our first parameter on the daily time frame. Click OK. Let's run the scan. We're left with 25 stocks only. So right off the bat, a very small list of stocks that you could use as your starting point to work with. Now in this list, you'll find Micron Technology at the very top. We also have GameStop, Robinhood, a few other stocks. Let's continue adding in some of the other filters that we had around trend with moving averages to see if we can reduce this list of 25 down even further. So our next condition that we can add in can be around moving averages. So here we're going to need the 8 EMAs, so EMA 8, and I'll call that with exponential average close 8, then EMA 34, and then our SMA 50 with simple moving average close 50. Now let's create our two different conditions. So we'll say moving average condition, and this is going to be if EMA 8 is greater than EMA 34, and EMA 34 is greater than SMA 50. So this is our first one. Let's add that in, and let's see what happens to this list of 25. I'll click OK, scan. That's already dropped down to 7. And let's see if this list goes down even further when we add in the percent within the SMA condition. So let's say percent within SMA. And here I'll give this a condition, percent within SMA. And we can say something like our close price must be greater than or equal to the SMA times 1 minus some percent that the user can input. So let's just create that here at the top. So we'll say input percent, and I'll start with 5. And so we'll say 1 minus percent and close must be less than or equal to SMA times 1 plus percent. And this should be SMA 50. SMA 50. And let's see if this reduces our list down any further from 7. Now we're left with just 4 stocks: Micron Technology, T-Mobile, Roku, and Antero Midstream AM. Let's look at Micron and Roku. So let's go to Micron. Micron we've already seen, but this is meaning exactly the type of pattern we'd be looking at. For all volatility box members, I'd be looking at the edge signals indicator as our confirmation. When you see the green arrow, that officially tells you that, hey, that momentum is starting to get going. We're looking for whatever this move is to fire in that bullish direction. Next one we have is Roku. We look at Roku. We are meeting all of the conditions that we laid out, but doesn't really meet maybe the criteria because that 200 SMA is above where we're currently trading. So we could add that in as one additional filter if we wanted. Let's look at T-Mobile. T-Mobile looks like it's a little bit of a ways from our 50 SMA. That's within 5% though, so maybe we'd want to, in terms of tweaks, let's say reduce this from 5% down to maybe 3%. And let's say for our moving averages, we want to also add in Def SMA 200 based off of what we saw. And let's say this is going to be close 200. And we also want to make sure that our SMA 50 is greater than SMA 200. And then our second condition automatically gets taken care of with that percent variable. Let's rerun the scan. And boom, we're left with just 2 different stocks now, a much smaller list. You saw how we filtered down along the way, and you can take out any of the filters that maybe you don't want if you'd like a slightly larger list. In fact, we saw starting with just a range compression gives you a large enough list to get started for stocks that are compressing, that might even have a squeeze, that are worth investigating further. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to interact with the average true range inside of ThinkorSwim and use it for building some fairly robust scans using the ATR as a key component of this entire scan puzzle. Good luck trading. I'll leave a link to download the scans in the description box below. Take care, and I'll see you in our next update.